Hello, my name is Deborah March. I'm the Culturally Responsive Pedagogy Specialist for Instructional Services, and it's my pleasure to have this opportunity to present a little bit about my capstone experience this year. My problem statement is that Fairfax County Public School students K through 12 lack sustained and meaningful opportunities to study Black history and culture. Before we dig into a little bit of the quantitative data around this problem, I'd like for us to have an opportunity to ground ourselves in one student's story. Khadijah spoke with us last summer as part of a student listening group that I co-led with a member of the ACR team named Alicia Hunter. And Khadijah spoke with us from her job during quarantine about her hopes and experiences of learning about Black history and culture in Fairfax County Public Schools. Please take a moment to listen to her experience, and then we'll dig a little bit more into the system-wide data representing this issue.
Okay, so I know from my experience, this HOA year, the past year, I've learned so much that I hadn't learned before. My homie Mr. O'Brien, my HOA teacher, and he taught me so much. Like, I'm gonna be honest, in my entire how many years has it been? Like 12 years as being a student in this county, never I never knew who Ida B. Wells was, and I never knew the amount of influence and impact she had on this country as someone who stood for civil rights, as someone who fought for women's suffrage. And I thought that was crazy. And his ability to let us kind of choose our own things that we want to learn about, and then learn from each other's experiences. Some of my friends have told me about all that their family has gone through, and their past and their history. And it's like what Samar was saying, it's like you learn so much just through the people around you. I have so many friends from South America, friends from Africa, friends from Asia, and I didn't know about a lot of things that happened until they would tell me something that their parents had gone through. You would never learn this through history, you would never learn this through being taught that in a class, especially from a white Eurocentric perspective. And so it's just your friends, my friends have taught me so much, especially over this quarantine. We've all got together and just talked, and it's
There is so much that we as educators can take from Khadijah's words, both in terms of her description of the impact of the erasure of African Americans' experience from her learning in FCPS, but also in the structures that she and her friends co-created during COVID-related closures, through which they brought their own individual experiences and interests, their family stories, their cultural connections to bear on their collective study of US history, past and present. A real bright spot in our past year of unprecedented change. I take Khadijah's story as a lens through which to view the data that you're finding on this slide. And this is really just a snapshot of a much larger and more complicated problem of both underrepresentation and misrepresentation of Black and African American experience in K-12 social studies. If you look at Alexa Quinn's data, her study of the VDOE K through 5 social studies curriculum on the left, and you're noticing some data that speaks specifically to underrepresentation and erasure. It should be noted that her study focuses on the curriculum as it was written at the state level in 2019 and before. During the experience of my capstone, the state's African American History Education Commission's technical edits took effect, which are very important shifts at the standard level, as well as the essential knowledge of the way that Black history is taught in our U.S. history courses K through 12. So some of these numbers are not current, but the overall problems of underrepresentation and decontextualization that she names in this study continue to be a problem both at the state and local level, and of course within our classroom practices. And these are not the only ways in which curricular violence and harm shows up in teaching and learning about Black history, but these data are important markers for understanding some of the gaps and some of the ways in which state and local curriculum can drive instructional practices. There are many different actions that a leader could take in response to this problem. I chose one narrow, but I hope impactful avenue for change, which is to support the rollout of the new VDOE high school elective course in African American history. So my smarter goal is that by June 2021, 15 FCPS high school teachers will be prepared with the relevant knowledge, understanding, and skills to effectively teach the newly developed VDOE high school level African American history elective course at their schools. And my work for the capstone project really falls into three big buckets. One is professional learning. And so I worked with others to design and enact a spring 2021 academy course to prepare teachers of the VDOE African American History High School elective. I also worked a great deal in collaboration with FCPS Social Studies and Equity and Cultural Responsiveness to communicate with stakeholders to ensure that the course runs at our schools. This also involved coordination with VDOE and state leaders in social studies across various counties in Virginia. And finally, resource development. I worked with others, especially teachers, classroom practitioners, to develop high quality, centralized resources to support schools and teachers running the course. And when I proposed my capstone project, I had outlined certain strategic actions that I would undertake. And I did have the privilege of undertaking actions that went beyond that initial plan. And so when it comes to professional learning, for example, I've collaborated with division leaders to not only offer this academy course, but to offer a summer Black History Institute for all educators across our system in collaboration with university professors and state level stakeholders. When it comes to communication, I've had the privilege of working alongside the Virginia Social Studies Leadership Consortium, as well as the Social Studies team in the Virginia Department of Education to understand how best to share information about this course to leverage this unique opportunity to take a deep dive, long overdue, into Black history in our high schools. And finally, when it comes to resources, I participated in the VDOE's Carter G. Woodson Collaborative, which was a group of educators and scholars and museum practitioners who collaborated to create resources aligned to the African American History Education Commission's technical edits. And that was a privilege that allowed me to leverage some of that learning and that collaboration to bring to bear in my support for this elective course and systems level change. While I learned a great deal about leadership from all of this work, I'd like to use this presentation to take a deeper dive into the Academy course. I worked at the beginning of this capstone project with 10 FCPS educators, as well as community stakeholders, including current and former students and community members in diverse contexts. And we brought our identities and experiences to bear on the design of a course that we thought would serve our system's specific needs as it relates to teaching and learning about Black history at the high school level. And the 10 original educators I worked with have been working with me to facilitate this course this spring. Creating truly collaborative structures among people who had never met in person before was a significant leadership challenge for me as part of this project. But it was profoundly important, especially as a white leader focused on African American history in our K 12 social studies program. I knew that truly making space for power sharing and decision making across racial difference and across, the corporate hierarchy of our education system was a crucial component of a product that truly served our students and communities' needs. It became clear from our early collaborations that community stakeholders, including my co-teachers, really saw this course as an opportunity to take a dive into the local histories of African Americans within our community and state, as well as the global African diaspora, locating the long Black freedom struggle, as well as Black cultural production in African diasporic experiences, both in the transatlantic and around the world. Likewise, they felt very strongly that although it's called an African American history course, that the past and the present need to be commingled in the way that we design learning about concepts and systems. We also came to understand together that this is not just about content. The change that we hope to see, the change that our community deserves, is also about how we teach and learn. And if we want students to experience culturally responsive teaching, we needed to ensure that participants in this course also experienced cultural responsiveness in their learning. So that meant a lot of things about the design, but one clear, obvious choice was an emphasis on relationships, so that participants are invited to bring their whole selves into the learning, that their lived experiences and their funds of knowledge are assets in the instructional design, that we, as a professional learning community in this academy course, collaborate and listen in ways that encourage us to view each other as sources of knowledge. Not just the course text or the teacher as the source of knowledge, but each other. And finally, that we as facilitators must show up as learners rather than unquestionable experts or authorities. In terms of the curriculum design, we placed a strong emphasis on big concepts and essential questions so that we could all experience deeper learning in a survey course. There's always a danger in a survey course across centuries that there's this shallow content coverage. Instead, we privileged a deep dive into pre colonial West African societies. With session two, an emphasis on resistance in our exploration of transatlantic slaving system. Session three looked at an examination of the concept of freedom through the case study of Reconstruction. And session four was a close look at housing as the lens through which to understand the 20th and 21st century US Black freedom struggle. In our instructional materials, we prioritized inquiry, primary sources, and thinking routines for individual reflection as well as group processing, so that we could model ways that learners can think critically and build their own understanding about complex and often hard history. This is important in any course, but especially when we're teaching about the history of race and racism in this country. It is crucial that we empower all learners of all ages to think for themselves and orient themselves critically toward received knowledge and toward our institutions. We also created opportunities for participants to build background knowledge and to address gaps that might exist in our own learning about Black history. And for this, we leaned on the expertise of scholars, of organizations, of high quality documentaries, and of frameworks to balance these deep dives into content with opportunities to survey the field. In this way, participants and I could identify future areas for professional learning because we know that 5 sessions is not going to do it. We created resources that reflected these design principles that we hoped participants might adapt for their classrooms. And we prioritized time during the synchronous and asynchronous learning opportunities so that participants themselves could create resources they could use right now in our classrooms. And in terms of understanding the impact, this course is still in progress. This coming week, May 4th and 6th, participants will be exhibiting their learning. But participants do continue to share evidence of their learning in self evaluations, through formative tasks, and by documenting shifts in their own thinking about the content as well as about pedagogy. As I said, we're going to end our course this coming week with an exhibition of participants' learning. This is really meant to prioritize process over product and emphasize the collective state of our professional learning community and its construction of knowledge over time. And we'll also host a panel discussion led by 6 FCPS students. This should ground us once again in our students' experiences and hopes of Black history education as we commit to continued learning and action. And so, as my time enacting my capstone project comes to a close this year, I'm connecting back with my original SMARTER goal that 15 FCPS high school teachers will be prepared with the relevant knowledge, understanding, and skills to teach the new African American history elective course. I'm pleased to note that our enrollment in the Academy course went far beyond just the 15 teachers who might be teaching the course to include 2 sections of 24 and 35 teachers, respectively, in all different contexts from elementary through high school and in instructional and non-instructional roles. And so I believe and I anticipate, and I can't wait to see the systems level impact of this professional learning community that we're building across schools and even offices. I learned a great deal from my experience leading in support of the new VDOE High School African American History elective. This is not a comprehensive list, but these are 3 important lessons I've taken from my experience leading. I noticed that existing structures can foster as well as hinder transformation. in this work, especially as more and more of us in FCPS place equity at the center of all that we do, we often are, or at least I find myself, trying to do new things with old ways. And I am of the opinion that, if we want new systems, we need to have new people making decisions. And we also need to have new ways of being in professional relation to one another.